All right. Friday, I believe we talked about Homer Adolph Plessy. Did we not? We did not. Then where did we get to? Discrimination? You sure we didn't talk about Homer Plessy? Okay, gotcha. Nope, that's exactly where we want to be. So, did we even look at Homer Plessy on Friday? Okay. What do you notice about him in his picture? He has a nice beard. We've become quite the aficionados at looking at beards, right? Very formally dressed, has on a coat, a tie. Yeah, kind of like a tux almost. Okay? But again, that was the dress of the day. What else can you tell me about Homer Plessy? Got nice ears? He does have nice ears. They go with his head, right? You think he's white? Okay. Would you be surprised if I told you he were not white? At least according to the state of Louisiana. He is not Mexican. He is not Jewish. He is actually African American. After Reconstruction, states began to enact what were called Jim Crow laws. And basically what Jim Crow laws did is they segregated people based on their race. They segregated schools. They segregated hotels, restaurants, restrooms. Anything that was out in the public was segregated. 1892, Homer Plessy gets on a railroad car in Louisiana. And he knows exactly what he's doing. He appears to be white, so he could have gotten away with it. But he is 1/8 black, 7/8 white. And Homer Plessy and his compatriots are setting up the Louisiana Railroad Company. Actually, they're setting up the state of Louisiana because someone will turn him in. He goes and sits in the all-white section of a railroad car, and somebody is obviously there to say, hey, he's not white, he's actually black, or he's African American. But he's only 1/8 black. Now, here's the question that's been asked, and I'm surprised you haven't asked it yet. How could they tell? You saw Homer Plessy. How could they tell that he was 1/8 black? Was there some scientific method? Well, basically, they looked at his genealogy. And it was determined that somewhere, his great-great-grandfather, perhaps, had been black. Or his great-great-grandmother had been black. And so Homer Plessy is 1/8 black, 7/8 white. He's arrested for riding in that whites-only section. He is violating Louisiana's 1890 Separate Car Act that separated the races on trains and other forms of public transportation. So Homer Plessy does what every good red-blooded American does. He what? He sues, argues that his 14th Amendment right to equal protection under the law has been violated. What did I tell you was the heart of every civil rights legislation? That part of the 14th Amendment. So the U.S. Supreme Court, again, has an opportunity to really make a monumental decision, and they take the easy way out. They say that segregation is legal, and so segregation literally becomes the law of the land, according to Plessy v. Ferguson. Segregation is legal as long as facilities are separate but equal. Here's my question. Having not talked about this, but let's just throw it out there. Is separate but equal ever equal? No. In fact, separate but equal is inherently unequal.
It's like it just contradicts
itself. It can't be equal, and it's not. In fact, I wrote over on the board, segregation leads to discrimination. It always does. It always has. If you're going to separate out a group of people because of their race or their ethnicity or their gender or their sexual preference, or whatever, they're going to be discriminated against by some other group of society or part of society, or maybe all of society. But separate but equal becomes the law of the land, and creates more Jim Crow laws and actually reinforces this idea of the Jim Crow law. Now, you got about 2 minutes to learn all you could possibly learn about separate but equal. You ready? And if you're viewing this on YouTube, then you'll have to go back and find this, or I'll give you the link for it. So you too can sound smart about Quicken Loans. Oh, come on, moron. Yeah, that's what I want, full screen. What are you doing?
I'm Nicole Williams. I'm a historian. And here's what you need to know in order to sound smart about Plessy versus Ferguson. The Plessy versus Ferguson case originated with Louisiana's infamous Separate Car Act of 1890. The Separate Car Act required African Americans and whites to sit in segregated compartments on public carriers in Louisiana. People at the time of the Plessy decision actually believed that it was possible to measure the amount of black blood a person had in their body. The plaintiff in the Plessy case, Homer Adolph Plessy, was actually described as 7/8 white. Homer Plessy was arrested after he refused to give up his seat in defiance of the Separate Car Act of 1890. Plessy versus Ferguson is considered an important case because it established the doctrine of separate but equal that allowed states for the first time to legally segregate the races. One of the reasons that Homer Plessy brought suit was because of the difficulty in enforcing segregation in states like Louisiana. Louisiana had a large mixed-race population, making it very difficult to determine where the line could be drawn in terms of separating the races. The doctrine of separate but equal that grew out of Plessy versus Ferguson became the standard for all segregation ordinances after that decision. Despite the Supreme Court's ruling in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, the first municipality or city to pass a residential segregation ordinance was Baltimore, Maryland in 1960. The Supreme Court's landmark ruling in Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 ultimately was the death knell for the doctrine of separate but equal established in Plessy versus Ferguson.
All right. So now you can sound smart with Yahoo
known as the Red Guards. These large
Williams.
terroristic organizations were used
right.
to publicly humiliate.
Oh, come on. There we go. All right. I think it's right here, actually. Yep. There we go. So separate but equal again becomes the law of the land. And it's not just something you found in the South. Yes.
I was wondering why the laws were named Jim Crow. So I looked, and there was a character in the minstrel shows named Jumping Jim Crow. So they named it that. Also, a crow was considered a dumb bird or an ignorant bird. So I mean, to add further to the insult that was.
Yeah, I mean it's not a real person. It's a fictional character. And it comes to represent every law that is intended to oppress a black person. Now, one of the primary things that Jim Crow laws are trying to do is not only segregate, but also to eliminate. Okay? To eliminate the black vote. And they do that through several different ways. They use the poll tax, and we've talked about that before. A person has to pay a tax in order to vote. So here you have a poll tax receipt from Birmingham, Alabama, written in 1896. The tax, including all the fees, is $2.50. Is that going to break anybody? If you're poor, yes. If you're poor, yes. And so it is aimed at eliminating the poor. Well, who are most of the poor? Poor blacks. Yeah, you're eligible to vote, you're able to vote, but you can't pay your poll tax, so you can't vote. Literacy tests. You got to prove the ability to read and write at a certain level before you can vote. And here's how unfair that would be. Okay, Cam, you're going to have to read and understand that. Okay, Chris, you're going to have to read and understand this. Would you like to hear part of Cam's reading? Okay, it's a great book. What do you do with an idea? One day, I had an idea. Where did it come from? Why is it here? I wondered. What do you do with an idea? So that's what Cam's got to read and understand. Here's what Chris would have to read and understand. I already read that. I didn't like it. It has been frequently remarked, Alexander Hamilton observed in the opening paragraph of The Federalist, that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country by their conduct and example to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. Who's got it easier? Why? He's white. Okay? Now, it wouldn't have been a book or anything. They would have given an excerpt from something. Might have been from the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, or something even more modern than that. And they would have to read and comprehend it, but it would be given based on color. The Ordinance of Secession, quite possible. Trying to get rid of people who can't read and write. And in 1896, you're eliminating a good portion of the population in Georgia and in most places in the South. If you're white, can you get around the literacy test? Yes. The grandfather clause. If you are related to someone who fought in the Civil War, you can vote, whether you can read or write. So, poll tax, literacy tests, and then just inconvenient voter registration. We're going to make it hard for people to register. We're going to have registration open and close during the spring. What's going on in the spring? They're planting. Elections are going to be held when? In the fall. What are you doing in the fall? Harvesting. Most blacks in the South are sharecroppers, or a good majority of them. They can't afford to take a day off to go register to vote. And if they can, they certainly can't afford to take a day off during harvest to go and vote. So they make it inconvenient. Yes?
So you said the grandfather clause is not where anybody whose grandpa fought in the Civil War. Does that include African Americans?
No. They're very, you hear the rumor, well, there were a lot of blacks that fought in the Civil War for the Confederates. No, there weren't.
They were either slave hands or they were being forced to.
Yeah, but no, they weren't. No, they weren't. So, 3 ways that voter suppression takes place. And there's actually a couple of more. Racial violence. The Ku Klux Klan uses a lot of different tactics. They burn crosses. They light crosses in people's yards. What does that do? It lets them know the Klan is watching you and you better be careful. They actually burn churches to the ground. Why? Because for the black folks, the church was the center of community. Usually the most educated person in the black community was the preacher. And that's where voting registration would be held. That's where rallies would be held. And so the KKK burns down churches. They stand outside of polling places guarding them. Basically what they're doing is they're intimidating people, keeping them from coming in. Have you ever gone to vote with your parents? Anybody? There's a sign outside that says no campaigning within, I think it's 100 yards of a polling place. That's so people won't be intimidated. And then, of course, if that doesn't work, we're just going to find you and beat you up. And if that doesn't work, we're just going to kill you. Why? To scare black folks away from voting. Now, their choices are limited. If you're a black man or black woman for that matter, in the 1950s, even the 1940s, your choices are limited. Are you going to vote for the Democratic Party? Well, the Democratic Party is all about oppressing you. It's all about white supremacy. The Republican Party is virtually non-existent. So what do some people do? They just don't vote. Even though it's their right, even though they could, they don't because it doesn't matter. Because in Georgia, at least, the Democratic white primary is in place. Political parties are not controlled by the government. They're actually private entities. And at least back then, they could segregate. They can't now because of things that happened in the early 60s. But the Democratic white primary political parties are private. They're not public. And so constitutional law did not apply. Blacks were not allowed to vote in the Democratic primary. It was a whites-only primary. And if you remember from us talking Friday, the Neal Primary Act and the county unit system, if you're running for governor, what election do you have to win? The primary. And if you win the primary, you're going to win the general election. Why? Because you're going to be running against a Republican opponent, and he's not going to beat you. It never happened. In the 100 and so years after Reconstruction, there's a Republican governor at the beginning of Reconstruction, and there's one that's elected in the 80s. And that's it. Everybody else was a Democrat because the Democratic Party controlled the state of Georgia. And so it's vital that a Democrat win the primary, because if he does, he's going to win the general election. And that's primarily because of this, the Democratic white primary. All right. By the 1900s, and we're talking, 35 years after the end of the Civil War, 30 years after the 15th Amendment is ratified, African Americans are essentially disenfranchised. Not just in the South, but literally all over the country. Discrimination, don't make the mistake of thinking that discrimination against black folks only occurred in the South. It occurred everywhere. It occurred everywhere. All right. So, Jim Crow, as Caden mentioned just a minute ago, was a term that came from vaudeville, from the minstrel shows, where you would have a white actor that put on blackface and portrayed a black man. There was a character named Jim Crow. And that became a derisive term for any black man. And then it became a term that's used to describe any law passed in the South that put up different rules for blacks and whites. And they're based on the theory of white supremacy. In the South, they're based on the theory of white supremacy, and they are a reaction to Reconstruction. Well, you can pass the 15th Amendment. We don't have to make it easy for folks to vote. You can make them citizens, but we can make it very difficult for them to enjoy the rights they have as citizens. And so in that way, they're a reaction to Reconstruction. And they are the law of the land. In Georgia, Jim Crow laws are actually on the books, so to speak. There are others that aren't, like Emmett Till found out. You don't get fresh with a white woman. In other words, you don't whistle at her. You don't pay her a compliment. You don't even look at her, because that'll get you in trouble. All right. So here's a picture. What do you see? Yeah, colored admission, 10 cents. Where's the arrow pointing? Upstairs, because black folks would come in through the lobby where they get their popcorn and their Coke. folks are going to go back stairs into the balcony. Campus theater right down here. Been around for a long, long time. I watched many a movie in the campus theater. It has a balcony in it. Why does it have a balcony? Because black and white were going to be segregated when they went to watch a movie. What kind of movie's playing? Western with Bob Steele. I can't see the name of it. Just the name, though. Bob Steele. Great name. What else do you see? Dr. Pepper, good for life. Okay. White men only. Bathroom. I don't know what this door is. I don't know if it's the colored restroom. It's probably not, because it would be marked very clearly. This is probably inside. Yeah. Or they went over in the corner. Who knows? But that's the kind of thing you would see. Here's probably a better example of that. You have a white, and this is separate but equal, right? They're separate and they're equal, correct? Well, yeah, this is refrigerated over here. This is not. This is like tap water. But here's the interesting thing. Water supply comes from the same place. Water drains into the same place. That's what this pipe is right here. It's the drain for both of them. It goes in the same place. Yeah, I mean, and you're still going to be standing right next to each other. Yeah. When I was either a freshman or a sophomore in high school, we still did a homecoming parade where we all got to make floats. You know, we get somebody's big long tractor or trailer, and we build a float, homecoming float. Took all week. We had Monday to Friday to Thursday to do it. And so we were out late every night. Did it. Water department. And that's 76, 77. And I remember going different bathrooms. One had whites only, and the other had colors only. I've never seen that before. This was 1976, 1977. You know, Homer Plessy court decision was struck down. Joke, I don't know if somebody just never took them down. I mean, it bothered me then. It bothers me. I think this is a picture of the fact that separate but equal is never equal. It never was equal. And what you're going to see in another court case is the Supreme Court says that separate but equal is inherently unequal. And what I said this morning, segregation always leads to discrimination. Always. All right. So, you don't have to write this, but there's some Jim Crow laws in Georgia. Let's just kind of go through this and see how ridiculous things are. Mental hospitals. Let me ask you this. If you crazy, no, you don't have to write that. If you crazy, right? It's kind of like being dead. If you dead, you dead. Does it matter what color you are? Yeah, not really. So mental hospitals, again, I don't think I asked y'all to write. Did I ask you to write this? Yes, I did. Sorry. It basically says that in no case shall Negroes and white persons be together. So the other day we talked about Amy Oxford. Remember her? And Willie Dixon? Willie Dixon's a patient at the Central State Hospital, and he lives in a segregated building. Blacks only. Intermarriage shall be unlawful for a white person to marry anyone except a white person. Does that knock out quite a few people? Yeah, it does. I mean, it knocks out a good part of the world if you stop and think about it. Any marriage in violation of this section shall be void. And actually, there's a case that takes place in Virginia in the 1950s, early 1960s. Loving versus Virginia. A couple gets married in Las Vegas, moved to Virginia, and the state of Virginia says their marriage is null and void. They won. Barbers. No colored barber shall serve as a barber to white women or girls. I can cut a white man's hair, but can't cut a white woman's hair. Burial. The officer in charge shall not bury or allow to be buried any colored persons upon ground set apart or used for the burial of white persons. What's the oldest cemetery in Millersville? Memory Hill. Are there black folks and white folks buried in Memory Hill? Yes, there are. Exactly. You're dead. What does it matter? But this is the way people thought. You know? How many of y'all drink after each other? At home, at school? You've done it before anyway, right? Hey, man, let me have a swallow of that. Do you look at the person and go, oh, wait a minute, no, you're the wrong color. I can't have a swallow of that. No. But I can remember when I was a kid, that was, no, black folks and white, they wouldn't dare drink out of the same cup. That's just the way it was. As ridiculous as it sounds. Now we don't do that because you'll get something and die. Doesn't matter what another person is. But yeah, I mean, even in Millersville, we have black cemeteries and white cemeteries. Now, it's more common for people to be buried in either one. But, it's kind of a thing, kind of like churches. You know, the church is becoming more integrated, but particularly here in the South, you have black churches and white churches. You know. By the way, any of y'all go to Flag Chapel? Tony Fraley? This guy I actually grew up with. He's got to have a heart and kidney transplant. He's about my age. Just give you something to think about. If you start feeling sorry for yourself, life could be worse. Restaurants. Whew. If you own a restaurant, you can serve either white people or black people, but you can't serve both in the same room. Really? Or if you're going to serve alcohol, you can't serve the two races in the same room together. And that's where you get the idea of black folks having to go to the back door of the restaurant. Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier in Major League Baseball. Every time they came south, like they went to St. Louis, which was considered part of the South, during spring training, he often couldn't stay where the team was staying, and he couldn't eat where the team was eating because of Jim Crow laws. Not just in the South, but predominantly in the South. North as well. That's just the way people thought. Wrong as it is, that's just the way people thought. Amateur baseball. Yeah. It shall be unlawful for any amateur white baseball team to play baseball on any vacant lot or baseball diamond within 2 blocks of a playground devoted to the Negro race. Wow. And it shall be unlawful for any amateur colored baseball team to play baseball in any vacant lot or baseball diamond within 2 blocks of any playground devoted to the white race. It's baseball. Well, they're talking about, bringing people together. And if you look, Burns did a great documentary on baseball. He did a great Civil War documentary, and then he did a documentary on baseball. And one section of it is devoted entirely to the Negro Leagues. And it's kind of hilarious because you'll see the Negro Leagues playing in front of 20,000, 70,000 folks, and all of them are black. But then they'll barnstorm, they'll play against major league teams, and you'll see mixed audiences, mixed fans. You know, there'll be 70,000, 80,000 people in Yankee Stadium to watch a black team play a white team. And more often than not, the black team won because they had great players. Y'all know that some of y'all will be interested in this. Major League Baseball just said they would accept records from the Negro Leagues and give them major league status, which is pretty cool because they were some really good baseball players. Remind me to tell you something else in just a minute. Okay? Got it.
I watched something about one of the Negro League players. I can't remember who he played for, but they said he was the fastest man to ever play. And they said he could turn off the light switch and be in bed by the time.
What was his name? Cool Papa Bell.
I thought that was just hilarious.
I mean, what a great name, Cool Papa.
He could turn off the light and be in bed.
Yeah, he was fast. Cool Papa Bell. Remind me. I heard something your grandmama said to somebody this week, too. I thought it was great. You want to know what it was? She said to somebody, I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. I thought, that's pretty cool. So parks, unlawful for colored people to frequent any park that's set aside for white people, and the reverse is same. Wine and beer, if you're licensed to conduct the business of beer and wine, you either got to serve white people or black people. You can't serve to both at the same time. Again, the level of ridiculousness is quite high. So, 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, wins a decision in the U.S. Supreme Court. According to the court's decision, segregated schools were unconstitutional. Under what? What clause? The 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause. Whoop. So we'll stop right there, and we'll actually pick up tomorrow and talk a little bit more about Brown versus the Board of Education. But again, the very heart of it is the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Doop-a-doop-a-doop-doop-doop.